So I'm going to go through Daniel chapter 3, but before I do so, I'd just like to do a quick recap of Daniel chapter 2. Just the end part of it, where we finished with Daniel explaining to King Nebuchadnezzar, first of all, telling him what dream it was he had, because Nebuchadnezzar had forgotten that dream, and also interpreting the dream for him, and showing that the the head of gold on the metal man uh, statue that both Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel were shown in their dreams represented Babylon, or the kingdom of Babylon, in that he, Nebuchadnezzar, being king, also represented the head of gold on the statue, and that after Babylon there would be another kingdom, which we know through reading history that that kingdom was Media and Persia, sometimes referred to as Medo-Persia. That's why it had two arms, one arm representing Media, the other one representing Persia, two nations in one. So that was silver, and then after that we had bronze or brass, which represented Greece, and then after that we had legs of iron, representing pagan Rome, and then after that, in the feet, we have iron mixed with clay, uh, which represented a lot of Christians believe that represents the divided nations of Europe, uh, and that the 10 toes on the statue in Daniel chapter 2 represent Europe, but that's not correct. But because read, if you want to go and check your Bibles again, I explained this last time, but if you go to Daniel chapter 2 verse 44, it says that in the days of these kings, in the days when there are 10 kings, represented by those 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2, God shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Never be destroyed. So that didn't happen when we had those 10 nations that came out of the divided Roman Empire. There were 10 nations at some point, but we know that three of them were destroyed uh, at by armies that were sent by the papacy to destroy them, because those three nations, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths, held sway over Rome and also had a different theology to the papacy. It's believed that one of the things that they didn't agree with was the doctrine of the Trinity. I'm talking about specifically the Heruli and the Vandals and the Ostrogoths. It is said by some historians that they didn't believe in the Trinity. That's why the papacy sent armies to destroy them, as well as the fact that they had some kind of power over the papacy. And in order for the papacy to ascend in power and authority, the papacy had to destroy those three kingdoms. So we find that in Daniel chapter 7, which we'll get to in the coming weeks. So we find at the end of Daniel chapter 2 that it looks like Nebuchadnezzar is about to acknowledge the God in heaven is sovereign and having power over him and authority over him, even as king. Remember that I mentioned that those days, the time of Nebuchadnezzar and not just Nebuchadnezzar, but the other kings that were there around that time. Those were real kings. They had power and authority, because if they commanded someone to do something and they did, and that person didn't do it, they would basically that person would have their head cut off. And we saw that Nebuchadnezzar threatened the wise men, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. He threatened to kill them and their families and to make their homes a dunghill. But those wise men in Babylon were saved because Daniel, God through Daniel was able to save them, because Daniel was able to tell the king what the dream was that he had and what the interpretation was, which I've just gone through again. So, like I was saying, it looks at the end of Daniel chapter 2 that Nebuchadnezzar perhaps was getting converted, but that wasn't really the case, because we find that at the beginning of chapter 3, which I'm just going to read a bit. I'm not going to read everything, otherwise it'll be too long. Then there's no point of me reading the whole chapter because you guys can do that for yourselves. But uh, at the end of Daniel chapter 2, once again, Daniel was rewarded for what he did for the king. And Daniel also requested that his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which were their Babylonian names, that they would be promoted as well, which they were. The beginning of chapter 3, verse 1 says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. So this same king Nebuchadnezzar, who we thought was getting converted and was about to give his life to God after acknowledging the God of heaven, the God of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as the only true God, he turns again and um, starts being defiant, because now if you pay really close attention to what is being said in verse 1, we're being told that the king made, not him personally, obviously he had someone make that image for him. He made an image of gold. Remember that in Daniel chapter 2, the metal man had a head of gold. So what the king, what Nebuchadnezzar was trying to say here was, he made a golden image that was all gold. So he was trying to say basically that his kingdom was going to last forever, that God was not going to remove Babylon and replace Babylon with another kingdom, that his kingdom was going to last forever. So he was basically in defiance, trying to fight with God. So let's just look at some of the things that I mentioned here. That it says that the height of this image of gold was three score cubits. Now, a score is 20, basically. So here we have three score, which is 60 cubits. I actually looked this up on my laptop. It's so that's just over 27 meters in height. And then we read that when it says breadth, and it says the breadth of it was, it says the breadth thereof 6 cubits. 6 cubits is 2.74 meters, roughly. For those who don't use meters, you can work out what that is in feet. Okay, I can't, calculate everything what it is in feet and stuff, because I'll forget. And verse 2. So yeah, this image was set up in the plain of Dura. Okay, in the province of Babylon. Verse 2, then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now, before we put a magnifying glass, so to speak, on verse 2, I just wanted to say that, so at the end of chapter 2, we see what we note what look like signs of King Nebuchadnezzar repenting, but then after that he changes his mind again and goes back to to worshiping idols and going back to the false system of worship that he had believed in before the dream had been explained to him by Daniel in chapter 2. So when I think of how Nebuchadnezzar was behaving, looking like he was about to give his life to God and be converted, and then going back to his old ways, it just reminded me of what happened during 9/11 and after 9/11. We heard that there were many, especially Americans, but maybe other people around the world that were converted. Excuse me. After those events happened, because there are some people who actually thought that the world was about to end when 9/11 happened. Now, for maybe this is the first video you're watching. I have said many times that 9/11 was an inside job. It was actually the American government that did that. Um, there are many, most major world events are actually inside jobs, just like the Titanic, was sunk purposely, and I made a video about that. You can go and watch that later. But the reason for 9/11, just in case this is just for anyone who's curious as to know why the American government would do that, is because they wanted an excuse to invade other countries for resources like oil, and also there was also religion involved. Remember that I've said many times that that America uh, uh, is fighting wars on behalf of the papacy. That's where the military-industrial complex is centered. Remember, I've said that many times, and also the banking is centered in London, in the UK. We tend to think that banking, the world's um, economy, or the world's finances, are the financial center of the world is in America, but that's not true. I mean, just because we use the American dollar, it doesn't mean that you know the Americans are the ones who are running the finances of the world. No, it's it's the papacy, basically, just like we're reading here in the book of Daniel. It's the papacy, but the papacy uses these European Jews, the Rothschilds, who F. Tapasosi said in his book Rulers of Evil, that the Rothschilds are the keepers or the guardians of the Vatican treasury. And also, if we go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, we read that the Rothschilds are keepers of the Vatican treasury, or guardians of the Vatican treasury. They are treasurers, basically, of the papacy. Okay, so I was just explaining that after 9/11, or when 9/11 happened, there were many people around the world, but especially Americans, who started going to church. It appeared that they'd be converted, but when everything settled down, when the dust had settled and everything was back to normal, some of them went back to their old ways, their old lives, doing whatever they were doing. Following after the ways of the world, and the same thing happened during this pandemic. There were many, during this pandemic, who thought that the world was about to end, and they repented and gave their lives to Christ. But when everything went back to normal, they also went back to business as usual. Um, uh, just turn their backs on God again. But that's not a true conversion. A conversion, that's most of the time when someone is converted because of fear. It's not normally a genuine conversion. But let's just carry on with with chapter 3 of Daniel here. So Nebuchadnezzar called all these high level of officials: the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and in verse 3 says, then the princes, the governors, and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Why would Nebuchadnezzar call all these government officials that had high positions? Well, because then and everyone else would then follow these misleaders, is what I like to call them. It's the same with what happened during this pandemic, when we saw the presidents, the prime ministers, the kings, the queens. Some of the queens maybe didn't specifically were not shown getting the poke on TV, but remember when Queen Elizabeth the second was still alive, and she actually went on TV and said that getting the poke wasn't painful, and encouraged his in quote subjects to go and get the poke, because it wasn't painful. That they say the same thing is happening today. We have these so-called leaders who are misleading their citizens in basically encouraging them to do the wrong thing. This is what the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar was doing. He called the government officials because he knew that those who were under them, those who would follow them, if I can say it that way. Then an herald cried aloud, this is verse 4, to you it is commanded, O people, nations and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So now we see the introduction of music, and it's been said many times that music is a universal language. We even see in the churches, and I had experience of this in the SDA church, which I know I'll continue to mention for those maybe who are sick and tired of me saying it. Yeah, I'm talking about things that I experienced. I can't talk about what's happening in the other churches because I didn't really have that much experience of that, even though I did attend other churches at the invitation of friends. But I know that similar things are happening in, especially in Protestant churches. Remember that the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, so called, or the Company of Jesus, was set up to destroy Protestantism. Initially, they wanted to fight against the Mohammedans, to fight against the Muslims, but they realized, Ignatius specifically realized that the Protestantism was a greater threat to the Catholic Church than Islam. But of course, they are still fighting Islam. That's why we've had these wars in the Middle East, and even they're still ongoing now with these wars that are being fought, or the genocide happening in Palestine, and the wars going on between Israel and Syria, and very soon we are hearing that Israel, or Israel, as some like to call it, still wants to fight with Iran. That they're planning a war against Iran. So it's because of the fact that the papacy has two main enemies, or used to have two main enemies. Those enemies have been weakened to a great extent. But those two enemies, the two main enemies, I'm not saying they're the only ones, the two main enemies of the Catholic Church are Protestantism and Islam. And I think I already explained in one of my videos why Islam is hated by the papacy, because they rebelled against the papacy, because the papacy actually created Islam through Muhammad and his first wife, Khadija. Yeah, but I explained that in another video. So I also forgot to mention, just to mention that in the very first verse of chapter 3, it mentions that the the image of gold was 60 cubits, which is 60. 60 cubits, and then the width of it was 6 cubits. So we see the numbers 6 appear in there as well, which those numbers usually, the number 6 usually refers to, is associated with Satan or sinfulness. Some say the number 6 represents man, or the sinful man, whereas the number 7 is said to represent God, and some say the number 8 represents God and His righteousness. So. So I think I was on verse 6. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, the flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So remember, I said that music is even being used in the various churches today. There's a lot of emphasis on music, because music is not only a universal language, but it also distracts. Let me just talk about Protestants, for instance. I saw this happening in the SDA church, that those who were infiltrating the SDA church brought in all this loud music, which was foreign to Adventism. The playing of drums and rock music, and not only were they playing this rock music in church, but it was very loud as well. And this seems to attract young Christians, but they basically come to church for the wrong reasons. It's like they want to be entertained, and so the focus goes on to. The focus is on celebration, because the Catholic Church said that everything should be a celebration in church. So we have celebration worship, where there's a lot of emphasis on music, but a disregard of and or not much attention is paid to God's word in church anymore. And bearing in mind that I left I left the corporate church in 2011, so and now we're in 2025, so it's probably far worse than it was before. Um, because basically the papacy wants Protestants to forget their history, to forget their doctrines, and focus on music. So this is something else that was being used as well by Nebuchadnezzar. And verse 8 says, "Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews." I think I read verse 7, didn't I? Yeah. So here we have snitches, snitches that came and accused the Jews, certain Jews, not all of them. Remember that. So something else that will come up here in chapter 3 is that there was, excuse me, there's always compromise. Whenever a crisis comes up, you find that the majority of people will compromise, whereas a very small number. This is repeated very often in the Holy Scriptures, that we have a small number representing the remnant that shall be on the earth when Christ comes. They are the ones that stand up for what is right and what is true. It says here, verse 9, "They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And I think there was a bit of jealousy there, that these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Azariah, Mishael, and I forget what the other name is for their Jewish names. Um, I think the Chaldeans were jealous of them because they were foreigners, but they had very high positions in government. It says, "These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Nebuchadnezzar became very angry. I won't read everything. He became very angry and basically he asked for these men to be brought to him. And he then said, "Is it true that you're not worshipping or you don't serve my gods? You don't serve the golden image which I have set up." And then he tried basically to give him a second chance. He thought maybe they misunderstood how serious the consequences of not bowing down and worshipping this what the consequences were of worshipping this golden image that he had set up. He just wanted to give him a second chance and said, when you hear the music again, you need to basically do as everyone else is doing. Yeah, when you hear the music, bow down and worship the image. Otherwise, you'll be thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And then at the end of verse 15, he says, "And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" So you see, he was very, I think Nebuchadnezzar's ego got the better of him. Remembering that at the end of chapter 2, he had basically showing signs of surrendering his life to God, to the God in heaven, and humbling himself and acknowledging that he was only human, and that God was overall in control of everything, even though God is the one that sets up kings and removes kings or presidents and prime ministers. He was acknowledging that, but now he turned around and started to try to defy God. And here he says, "Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" He thought that, if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego disobeyed his command and they were thrown into the fire, that would be the end of them, that no one would save them. The verse 16 says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set." So here we find only three men who were able to stand up and say one of the most powerful words in the English language, "no." Like Martin Luther, and I'm not talking about Martin Luther King. There seems to be some confusion sometimes when that name is mentioned. I'm not talking about the black American civil activist. who was fighting for the rights of black Americans. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about Martin Luther, the German monk who stood up and said no to the Pope and all his princes and all his cardinals. And look at what great change that man made. So these three, out of the thousands and thousands who were there, including some of them who were Jews, were the only ones who basically said no. Remember what I said about compromise? When a crisis arises, you find that the majority will go with the flow. They will follow their misleaders, just like what happened in this pandemic. Just like what happened after 9/11, when all these new laws were introduced, the Patriot Act, which was basically written, co-written by, or co-authored by Joe Biden, the Roman Catholic, that most people will go along with whatever rules are introduced when there's a man-made crisis, which is intentionally planned, to strip us of our civil rights. So here, these three men said, "No, we're not going to serve your God." And then in verse 19, he says that Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, basically meaning he was very angry. And it says the form of his visage, or his appearance, was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whereas maybe he had been very friendly towards them, now he was very angry with them. And he commanded that they should be thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And it says here, because it's the most mighty men were called, thinking, because here the thinking, behind Nebuchadnezzar was that he was trying to use force. He thought if he uses force, that even God couldn't deliver them. Make a very, hot fire. Make the fire even 7 times hotter than it was. That's what he says in the chapter. Make the fire hotter by 7 times, and also call the strong men to throw these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, into the fire. That way they wouldn't escape. So these men were bound, it says, in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And because the king's commandment was urgent, these so-called mighty men were not very careful in how they were going to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire. And as they actually threw these men into the fire, they actually got burnt themselves. And got killed by the heat of the fire. And then these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. That's verse 23. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, it says here in the King James version, which basically means he was astonished, and rose up in haste. So he was obviously sitting down, probably sitting on his kingly chair, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. There you go. So Jesus Christ actually came down from heaven and joined Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire and stopped them from being burnt. And it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar seemed to know what the Son of God looks like. And for those who believe that, Jesus only, there are some who are mistaken in thinking that Jesus only became the Son of God when he was born here on this earth, when he was incarnated, and became a man here on this earth. That's when he became the Son of God. But here we see in that verse that it says that the 4th man in the fire was the Son of God. So it says, Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fire furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, captains, and the king's counselors being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. So there was not even a smell of fire on these 3 men when they came out from the fire. And Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel Obviously, he's talking about the Son of God who appeared as an angel and delivered his saints that trusted in him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Nebuchadnezzar goes on in verse 29 to make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. So you see here, Nebuchadnezzar once again is resorting to the use of force, which we saw in Daniel chapter 2, that he's always making threats. Now, here he seems to be getting converted again, but once again he's threatening those that if anyone says anything bad about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, then they are going to be killed, and their houses will be made a dunghill. I think that's what it says here. Yeah, their houses shall be made a dunghill. Instead of basically trying to use love and dialogue like God does to woo us, he's threatening people with violence. Last verse here, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And maybe for those who are wondering where Daniel was, maybe Daniel wasn't there. We don't know. It doesn't say where Daniel was. But I doubt that Daniel would have compromised and worshipped the golden image. I don't think he did that, because I personally I don't think he was there. So here it looks once again like Nebuchadnezzar is converted and he's going to acknowledge God, but we find in the following chapters that that's not the case. Not immediately anyway. It's after a while that he really truly gets converted. But yeah. So very interesting chapter, and there's a lot we can learn from that. Yeah, things like one of the major lessons is don't compromise. Okay, don't follow the crowd. Here, I think out of the thousands and thousands who were there, and were told to worship this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up in defiance of God, saying that my kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, because God had showed him a dream where, uh, only the head of the statue in Daniel chapter 2 was made of gold. Here he made a statue or an idol out of purely out of gold. To signify that his kingdom was going to last forever, but that's not the case. So the point I was addressing was the issue of compromising. Don't compromise just because the majority are going a certain way. You don't follow we are not sheep. Okay, God gave us a brain and critical thinking skills so that we can listen to both sides and make our own decision. For those who failed the test during this pandemic, don't allow that to happen again. Actually, my way of thinking is whatever the majority does, I do the opposite. If the majority goes left, I go right. If they go right, I go left. I don't follow pastors. I don't follow presidents, prime ministers. I don't follow the Pope. I don't follow cardinals. I don't follow what the doctors say, what the scientists say, and I don't obey the TV. And I suggest you do the same. Be different. Dare to be a Daniel, like the song says. Anyway, yeah, let me end it there, and I'll see you in the next video.